So I've worked with older adults for a number of years, and a theme that's come up a lot in my practice is the hardships and difficulties surrounding aging. And how can we overcome that? And of course, I don't have a magic anti-aging serum, but we can talk about how mentally we can overcome this together. So I'd first like to take a poll from the audience, and you can either shout it out or you can raise your hands, and you can say whatever comes to mind. It doesn't have to be diplomatic at all. What words come to mind when you think about aging? Oh, okay. Weak, okay. Slowing down. Wisdom. Frailty. Challenging, yep. Pain, that's a good one, yeah. Changes, yeah, very good. Yeah, so we heard a number of positive and negative ideas that come to mind when we think of aging. And so in America, we have quite prevalent negative stereotypes surrounding aging. And this is very different from other cultures. So in other cultures, aging might be seen as a time to become more wise, or it might be seen as you earn more respect. Even in some cultures, older adults relinquish duties that are taken over by their family or friends because they've earned that respect as they've aged. But in America, oftentimes we think of aging as this inevitable decline, physical incapacity. It's guaranteed we will have a cognitive impairment or a dementia. And we have very prominent ageism within our culture, which is the discrimination based off of perceived age, and even ableism, so discrimination based off of ability. And we know that these stereotypes actually influence our health. And so Becca Levy, who I will cite quite a few times throughout this talk because she is one of the top researchers on positive aging, she did an excellent study looking at negative aging stereotypes. So she primed subjects with negative stereotypes like senile, dependent, incompetent. And then there was a group that was primed with positive aging words. And the group that was primed with negative terminology actually performed worse on their cognitive tests. And she noted increased cardiovascular stress, so higher blood pressure, higher heart rate in those that were negatively primed. So we know that the aging stereotypes actually make a difference in our cognitive performance. And this was a study looking at about 150 people of all ages, but the majority of them were actually in their 20s. And they asked them, what do you think about aging? What's your perspective? And how do you feel about being around older adults? And 57% said that they believed we live in a society that doesn't respect the elderly. 76% said they have a positive view of older people, so that was one good thing. 40% said they feared getting old. 39% preferred to be around younger people, and 14% said they never associated with any older people. So these are just some examples of how prevalent these stereotypes are ingrained within our culture. And so a lot of people have internalized these ideas, and now they find themselves within an aging cohort group. And so what does that mean for them? How can they actually combat those aging stereotypes? So they can lead to decreased self-worth, reduce self-care, and lower expectations of ourselves. And when we have lower expectations of ourselves, we kind of get in this funk that we really can't get out of. And it becomes this self-deprecating cycle. So stereotype threat is this idea, it's a psychological phenomenon where a vulnerable person can be affected by a stereotype that exists within their social group, and it can negatively affect their performance. So of course that acknowledges that they are aware of the stereotype, and it might be implicit, it might be deep down, it might be subconscious, but it can still affect them. And so some examples are, all older people are terrible at technology, therefore I will not use a computer, or I'm not even going to try. Or maybe it's, if I use a cane, it means I'm weak or frail. So it's kind of this all or nothing thinking, and it becomes a self-prophecy. And we really want to work to combat this with self-affirmation. So telling ourselves, I don't have to be a part of this stereotyped group. I can be more than just the stereotype. So the idea of subjective age is how old we feel, which is different from our chronological age. And this can vary across different domains. So it might be how old we feel cognitively, or how old we feel physically, or how old we feel with our social life. And this actually matters more in a lot of different ways that have to do with our health rather than chronological age. So research shows that having a younger subjective age was actually associated with better episodic memory and executive functioning. Older subjective age predicted poor future health, cognitive decline, increased hospitalization risk, increased morbidity and mortality above and beyond chronological age. Subjects with a younger subjective age actually had larger gray matter volumes in the brain compared to those that reported feeling their age or feeling older than their age. So our subjective age makes a huge impact in our cognitive health and our physiological health. So as we begin to think about aging and what it means for us, I'd like to first frame the word mindfulness. So mindfulness really is a lot more simple than we think. It's just focusing on something in a non-judgmental and intentional way. And we can do that with anything. You know, we're at this beautiful community center. We can look out the window at the beautiful Lake Washington and the trees and the snow-capped mountains, and that's being mindful. Or we can be mindful about what we're consuming, so the way our food tastes and the sense of the food and how that feels on our palate, and that's being mindful. And in this case, we're talking about being mindful about aging and what that means for us. Aging is inevitable. So as we're all sitting here, we're all aging, and that's completely out of our control, of course. However, what we can control is how we think about aging and how we can shift our mindset to help better ourselves. And of course, we want to practice realistic optimism. So acknowledging that there will be hardships about aging, there will be negatives, but choosing to focus on the positives. Practicing reframing, cognitive reframing, is instead of saying, I can't, really focusing on, well, what can I do? So when I was doing research for this talk, I came across this really interesting idea. So this is a theory called the gerotranscendence theory. And it literally translates to gero meaning old and transcendence meaning rise above. So rising above being old or rising above aging. And it's really this shift in perspective, which enables a person to see their life with a larger perspective and meaning. And it can help us have this growth mindset. So reflecting on the past, but how have I grown in that? And am I feeling more one with myself or the universe or with people around me? And these beliefs within this theme have been associated with increased life satisfaction and increased well-being. So this is an example of a study that actually looked at various themes from gerotranscendence theory. And so most of the participants agreed with all of these statements. So today, material things mean less compared to when I was 50. Today, I feel a greater mutual connection with the universe compared to when I was 50. Today, I feel a greater state of belonging with both earlier and coming generations. Today, I take myself less seriously than before. Today, I have more delight in my inner world, thinking and pondering compared to when I was 50. So the majority of people agreed with these themes, and these are really ways of transcending our viewpoint on aging. So how can we work on changing our thinking? So instead of focusing on just losses, trying to focus on both losses and gains. So some examples of losses might be our physical health and functioning, our speed of cognitive processing, grief, losses of life, fewer social networks, changing social roles. And some gains might be wisdom, improved judgment, emotional regulation, clarity in values, new roles and relationships, perspective taking, which kind of all encompass that gerotranscendent mindset. And then cognitive reframing. So instead of focusing on what I can't do, trying to focus on what I can do. So maybe I can't move as easily as I used to, but I can move with assisted devices. Maybe I can't do things as quickly as before, but I can still manage bills. It just might take me longer. Maybe I can't hear and see as well, but I could wear hearing aids to help me hear better. Maybe I'm not driving, but I could get rides. Maybe I can't play sports if I'm an athletic person, but I have new forms of activity and exercise that I can participate in. So why is this important? So this was a really large study done in partnership with the Harvard School of Public Health that looked at 14,000 older adults, 50 and older, and they found that those with a higher satisfaction with their aging had a 43% lower risk of dying over a 4-year period. They had lower risk for chronic disease, diabetes, stroke, cancer, heart disease. They had better cognitive functioning. They were more likely to be physically active, less likely to have difficulty with sleep, less lonely and depressed, and they were more optimistic with a greater sense of purpose. Is there a correlation between having a positive outlook on aging and Alzheimer's risk? And the answer is yes. So Becca Levy did this excellent study looking at the changes in the brain that are associated with Alzheimer's, which are shrinkage of our memory center, which is called the hippocampus, and greater accumulation of beta amyloid plaques and tau tangles. And she found that having a negative outlook on aging actually showed a steeper decline of hippocampal volume loss and a greater accumulation of amyloid plaques and tau tangles in the brain. She also looked at participants that had the historically known as a risk factor gene for Alzheimer's, and she found that those that had the APOE4 gene, if they had a negative outlook on aging, they had a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's, and if they had a positive outlook, it nearly dropped the risk 50%, so very substantial, and even those that have a genetic susceptibility. And in summary, I just want to emphasize, as you know, we're practicing this together, that our mindset matters. Mindset influences medicine, it influences our health, as we've learned today with all of these various studies that support this. Of course, aging isn't inevitable, and it is different for everybody. Everybody has a different walk and the way aging looks for them, but we want to reject those negative stereotypes about aging to help us live more healthily. And we want to focus on trying to find a meaning and purpose that really aligns with our core values. So we know that if we are practicing meaningful activities that align with our values, we have better quality of life, greater longevity, and then practicing realistic optimism. So acknowledging that there are hardships, there are difficulties, that's the reality. But what can we do to focus on those positives to help our well-being?